Alright, we're back for match number 4. First one in this video. Do lose the die roll going into round number 4. Taking a look. No lander, pretty easy mulligan. Another no lander, pretty easy mulligan. For a 5-card hand, this hand's pretty reasonable. 2 lands, Swift Spear, and then some combination of spells. Probably could keep Bolt and Lava Spike here, or Bolt and Rift Bolt. See what my past self chose to do. Okay, I chose to keep Bolt and Rift Bolt. Opponent goes a Giver of Ruins. Now, at this point, Giver of Ruins Godless Shrine with Verdant Catacombs. So, without looking at the Verdant Catacombs in particular, but just seeing this opening, I'd probably be thinking Orzhov Hammer, although it's not really been in favor lately. It's been usually the Azorius or the mono white version. But looking closely specifically at the Verdant Catacombs, this might be Devoted Druid combo at this point, but it's really kind of hard to guess. And the reason we let it on Zurgo, obviously our man's going to be kind of tied up answering their creatures in the future, so we want to lead on this, and then potentially next turn be able to go Swift Spear Bolt. Just kind of maximizing our mana efficiency and possible damage. Opponent indubitably plays Devoted Druid and passes. We got lucky here that we drew a second copy of Bolt. Otherwise, our opponent was likely going to be able to walk away with our Devoted Druid untapped. So we attack with Zurgo, presuming they're not going to block, which they don't. And then we have to take the turn, Bolt the Giver, Bolt the Devoted Druid. We're low on resources, but they're not in danger of comboing us next turn, so they play Urza Saga and pass. We play Swizzle Spear, attack with both creatures. Opponent presumably does nothing. Suspend Rift Bolt. They Eldamaris call for another copy of Devoted Druid. They play Giver of Ruins here. I understand not wanting to play Devoted Druid into a Rift Bolt coming off Suspend, but I still think you should probably play out both creatures here or just commit to making a Construct token. I don't think this kind of half-seas measure is where you want to be, especially since we're so low on resources anyway. But, we Rift Bolt, presumably killing their Giver of Runes, because we have no reason not to. We draw Eidolon, which is fine in this situation. It's not ecstatic, because they could go on the Mega Dude plan, but they once again choose to try to combo. And I can't say I blame them, but I do think if our opponent had gone in on make a token, get Shadow Spear, that they would be in a lot better shape than they currently are. They'd have a 2/3/3s in play. We really couldn't profitably attack without drawing a removal spell. And maybe they could have equipped Shadow Spear and started getting some life. I just don't think being on the Devoted Druid plan against any type of red deck generally is a good place to be. Having played the deck a little bit, you kind of learn those lessons. But we attack with everything. Our opponent chooses not, well, they have to block, but we Lightning Helix, and so they are dead. Or they choose not to block their Lightning Helix, and they are dead. Historically speaking, the Devoted Druid combo, the Kitchen Finks combo, or I guess it's Malira combo, Heliod combo, all these decks that have, some type of moving parts that were green-white based, all used to be very good matchups for Burn Game 1, and then Game 2 and Game 3. It came down to how prepared your opponent was to deal with red decks. Did they have Burrington Forge Tender? Did they have Core Firewalker? Did they have Dragon's Claw back in the day? Obviously, Heliod was a little bit better set up because the Heliod combo itself is life-based, but Finks and Devoted Druid Both came down to Burrington Forge Tenders. Now you have Sanctifier and Beck as well. So for that reason, obviously you're bringing in Path to Exile. We also chose to bring in the 2 copies of Smash to Smithereens. Now, that's not the best card in the world against them, but because they have the Urza Saga backup plan, and the fact that they have Giada's, or the, whatchamacallit that they just played last game, and they also have Shadow Spear, they also have Viridian Longbow. There's a decent enough amount of 1-drop artifacts to be able to blow up that it was worth bringing in Smash, especially to answer Shadow Spear. So 2 of those, 2 paths, board out the Eidolons, especially on the draw. So taking a look at our opening hand, pretty solid. Goblin God and the Searing Blaze, double Riftbolt, so pretty easy keep. As far as leading on lands, you probably lead on Sacred Foundry, possibly on Bloodstained Mire if you can guarantee that your opponent's going to play a blazeable creature in a timely manner. The reason you would keep this or play this second or third would be to trigger Searing Blaze at a more opportune time. Opponent plays Esper Sentinel. We play Goblin God and pass, or attack and pass. They draw Lair of the Hydra off of Goblin Guide. They play Sanctifier and Beck. Shocker, right? So we go ahead and suspend 2 Rift Bolts. They get nothing off of the Esper Sentinel this turn cycle. We get to use all of our mana, as opposed to, say, Searing Blazing the Esper Sentinel. Now, our opponent, has a good draw. They have a Sanctifier and Beck. They have a Devoted Druid. They have Esper Sentinel here. They have Burrington Forge Tender to protect their thing. So, how do you navigate all this? Well, they also play a Viridian Longbow. So, if they have a Vizier or a way to find Vizier next turn, we have to kill this stupid Devoted Druid. So, while I could potentially go face, I choose to send Riftbolt after Devoted Druid to see if they'll bite with Burrington Forge Tender here to protect it. We pay the 1 mana. They sacrifice to protect it. Like, okay, well, we then send Riftbolt at Esper Sentinel. Draw yet another copy of Searing Blaze, which isn't terrible in this matchup, although it's kind of poor against Sanctifier and Beck specifically. We go ahead and blaze the Devoted Druid. So the reason they put -1/-1 counters on it, it's put in the graveyard. It used to be something you would do against something like Path to Exile or these days Solitude, just so this doesn't die. Some of these variants play Postmortem Lunge, or Finale of Devastation allows you to bring things back from the graveyard, but not relevant against Burn. And I would say this is an uninformed Modern player that's trying to prevent losing the 3 life, but Chase 21, I believe, has some amount of finishes with Modern Burn, so I knew they knew that that wasn't really accomplishing them anything as far as avoiding damage, but I digress. Opponent equips Viridian Longbow to their Sanctifier. We draw Smash to Smithereens, which is not terrible here. We still obviously can't do anything as far as this Goblin God, but, at least they're pinging us for 1 point of damage. If I were them, I would start getting aggressive with Lair of the Hydra. They agree. They attack. We should probably have blocked here, but I think we were hoping that we'd be able to kill them. Put them to 6 here. And we do nothing. Opponent Eldamari's Call for their Devoted Druid. We have the kill kind of lined up here outside of something like Turn the Earth or something might be able to buy them a turn. But unlikely that they brought something like that in if they even have it in their deck. And then we just untap and we draw a Bolt. And then we have Skewer as a backup. So once again, Sanctifier and Beck did a good job holding down the fort against Goblin Guide. However, it is not really a source of pressure or life gain in the matchup, so while Sanctifier is very good against decks like Jeskai Breach, decks like, Rakdos Scam, it's serviceable against decks like Dredge. It's honestly not all that good against mono red or red-based burn, other than the fact that it keeps the creatures in check. But like, one Skull Crack, you can pass through this, Path to Exile, etc. So I think the bigger thing with our opening was actually the Forge Tender and the Esper Sentinel, and because of the way the Rift Bolts worked out, we were able to kind of play around that quite nicely, get rid of their first Devoted Druid, get rid of their first Burrington Forge Tender, and kind of go from there. So Devoted Druid is a difficult deck to pilot correctly, especially in the face of red-based removal spells, because that usually means you have a lot of bolts, a lot of Unholy Heats coming your way. But, anyways, on to match number 5. All right, taking a look at match number 5 against QB Turtle. Most of their finishes, I believe, are with Izzet Murktide, so strap in for a tight one. Okay, taking a look at our opening hand, we have one lander, a whole bunch of clunky spells, so unfortunately, despite potentially a Goblin God opening and being on the draw, this hand is a mulligan. This hand is also not great, but we do have, a lot more castable spells on 1 mana, so I'm inclined to keep this on 6, probably put back the Searing Blaze. Seeing if I agree with myself, I chose to put back something else, so Skewer the Critics could also make sense. Opponent leads on Basic Island, go! Now, the downside with leading on Basic Island for Murktide is this means any creature I can just slam. Because, I guess they could have Minor Misstep. It is a card that could potentially be played here. But generally it means something like Consider or Spell Pierce or Spell Snare, which a lot of these decks have started to run as a one of. But as far as creatures on a 1-drop, yeah, that's green light all day. We attack, reveal counterspell. Opponent plays their Ledger Shredder. Notably here, the downside for our opponent is no bobble or anything, so we were just able to blaze and keep the process going. This opening, very good for burn. Would be a lot more difficult if they had a Mishra's Bobble or something. We'd either have to expend more resources or potentially trade this for this plus a burn spell. So it was nice of our opponent to, and once again they just play all blue lands. Not a good place to be for the good old Murktide player. Opponent does nothing. We have no reason to take a game action here. So one thing I learned, or I should say relearned, from watching Mengu play burn against Murktide is constrict their mana. Don't give them opportunities to counter things unless they're clocking you. Don't spend your mana every turn. Now, as a burn player, it's all about mana efficiency, except when it's not. And when it's not, is usually against blue mana and counterspells. Then you try to do the constrict their mana plan. You try to play as many spells in one turn cycle when you're trying to kill them. Or, wait for them to tap low to put a threat on the field like Murktide Region or something. So, Rift Bolt, kind of the oddity here, but our opponent chooses to use a counterspell, which rarely so. They may not get another chance. We don't cast any other spells because we don't want the Shredder growing. So, we know the one counterspell in their hand's gone. We know the basic island's gone, so we know nothing about their hand currently. We just continue to pass. Our opponent will actually have to start discarding cards before us. And they can't take any game actions because a bunch of their stuff in their hand is red. So we play that out. Feel free to swing in with both. No real big loss. We know they're drawing yet another card that's not going to do them any good. So once again, we got to be mindful of giving them the ability to double spell in a turn, because then they can start looting, looking for red sources. So they're finally going to have a red source, but it also means they're going to have to deal 3 damage to themselves, or wait a turn for deploying red mana, which looks like they're choosing the wait option. They play Murktide Regent. And so this is kind of the point where I was talking about, where the opponent, if we're pressuring them with creatures, they're not really getting anything rolling. They're just sitting there doing nothing. So this is kind of the go light to try to kill them. Force Litigation is not really usually a thing in the Murktide list currently. Really, the format would kind of have to get pretty devolved for that to be a thing again. You know, back when Simian Spirit Guide or something was unbanned, but we just let them do their thing, untap, Rift Bolt their face, sure they get to loot, and they're dead. And we still had 2 more bolts that they would have had to fight through. So, easy peasy, but once again, our opponent, no red mana for the first several turns, kind of a death sentence against a deck like Burn when they have a decent draw. Alright, sideboarding. We actually had all of our tools for this one. We had 2 copies of Path Exile. Not a huge fan of Path Exile in these style of matchups, but you do need ways to get rid of Murktide and Ledger Shredder to let your creatures continue to attack. People talking about not bringing in Path Exile because it doesn't deal damage. You really got to look at it as it gets your opponent's crap out of the way so your creatures continue to get in there and do damage. Eidolon's kind of middling in the matchup, especially on the draw. You can get a little bit behind, especially if they have a Ragavan or DRC in the Ledger Shredder opening. Eidolon's kind of outclassed at that point, especially if they have managed to turn on the Delirious DRC and then have a 2/4 thing. You're just kind of playing something that's going to damage you and not really affect your opponent. So it's all about back foot, front foot, being on the play, being on the draw. Skewer the Critics. You're already bringing in a bunch of 3-drops. Skewer can be a bit awkward sometimes. So, alright, take a look at our opening hand. We see one more land that we like ideally, but it is a Canopy land, so that's not terrible. We have double 1-drops and Helix to answer an early creature, potentially a Ragavan, and then Boros Charm, so all seems pretty reasonable. Opponent, once again, leads on basic island, plays Consider. We could play Zurgo here, but one of the downsides with the Murktide matchup specifically is you need to maximize the windows where you can deal damage with your creatures before they start removing your creatures. And playing Zurgo, just ideally you want to lead on this when it's your first 1-drop, but in this particular matchup, especially on the draw, you want to make sure you're getting in your damage when you can. So we draw Path, which is a solid card. We play Swift Spear, go to attacks, reveal. They kill one of our creatures, so we take the opportunity to resolve Zurgo. And at this point, from this point on, pretty much we're just going to sit back and do what we did last game until they present a threat. Dragon Rage's Channeler, kind of a threat, but it's also a 1/1 right now, so we just attack in. Opponent has to attempt to kill their thing here, which is fine. Their Dragon Rage's Channeler is still a 1/1, so they can't block with it. Opponent does have red mana in this game, they just decide to attack. So they either have a removal spell or they just decide they're not going to play this. No attacks, no blocks game, we suspend Rift Bolt. They continue to attack. We're kind of winning this race right now. Our opponent decides to make things a little bit more interesting by playing a Murktide, which means we have to start forcing the issue here. So Spell Pierce kind of gets us here pretty good, but once again, there's a DRC in play, or Murktide in play, I should say. Play the Rift Bolt here. Go to combat. We Lightning Helix their face, trying to draw out another counterspell. They apparently have nothing. Let them attack. We cast a... Okay, I guess we do nothing here. We cast a Path to Exile on the end step to get rid of their Murktide Regent. They show us nothing, so I'm presuming at this point that they don't have a counter spell. And then, you know, we just kind of draw our get out of jail free card, so we go ahead and attack here. Opponent has a bobble. And we draw another Swift Spear. We attack. They do nothing. We cast Exquisite Firecraft. They cry. They lose the game. So, once again, we were very fortunate, though, especially game one, that our opponent stumbled so much on mana. It's one of the things Burn was always historically known for, was capitalizing on stumbles and struggles of the opponent. So, in a matchup that's as close, or at least probably slightly unfavored as Murktide, it's a close matchup. I could see either player saying that they're favored, but I do think Burn is an ever so slight dog because Murktide just sees so many cards, and unlike a deck like, say, Storm or the old Arclight Phoenix decks, Murktide generally does a pretty good job of keeping up with a deck like Burn, especially in the post-war games when they have Spell Pierces and Spell Snares and Fluster Storms to go with their mana-efficient threats. So, anyways, another win. It's on match number 6. Match number 6, and we are on the play. How exciting, how exciting. Okay, so 2-lander, Zurgo, Eidolon, bunch of burn spells. Seems pretty reasonable. Once again, this is kind of why I like Zurgo. Having another 1-drop to lead on here forces the opponent to react to that. Means Eidolon's more likely to survive. Which opponent leads on Bloated Delta. We go ahead and go to combat. See if we get draw a Fatal Push or something. Opponent does nothing. So we cast Eidolon post-combat. Opponent still does nothing. They get basic Island. Cast Consider. Spell Snare would have been pretty annoying there, but looks like we might be up against Murktide or perhaps Shadow here. Opponent leads on Dragon Rage's Channeler. Once again, pretty solid attack here. Another point I wanted to bring up is people ask, is Ragavan always better than Zurgo? Situations like this where your opponent has an X1 or 1-1, you're attacking with a 2-2. Sure, they could, play a Consider, play, like Void, what the heck is the card? Vapor Snag or something, trigger this, but, at this point it's pretty safe attack overall. We attack in with both of our creatures, put real pressure on our opponent. They choose not to block. We cast a Skewer the Critics. Opponent casts a Spell Pierce, but they're still taking damage. And these are also the situations where Eidolon is very good. Regardless if your opponent counters your spell, they're still taking damage. And this puts them in position for Boros trying to potentially finish them off, even if they can deal with all of our creatures. So, opponent plays a Murktide Regent, so they are just dead. So they have effectively dealt with all of our creatures, but we just have Boros Charm or double Lava Spike to kill them. So, once again, it's all about maneuvering and positioning. Creatures kind of leveraging that position. Eidolon really leveraging that can be quite important. Zurgo did its role in this game. Pretty solid hand. Murktide player didn't have a terrible hand overall. The turn 1 not interacting kind of hurt them. But, they had Spell Pierce. They had Dragon Rage's Channeler. And, this is their turn 3. They have a 5/5 in play. So, they still had a reasonable hand. Sideboard, same meatball as the last turn round. We bring in the Firecrafts. We bring in the Pass. We get down the Eidolons on the draw. Take out a Skewer. Rinse, repeat. Hopefully the same result. Alright. Opening hand here. 4 lands, 3 spells. Feels like a mulligan. And I keep this hand. Alright. Get bailed out by our opponent mulliganing to Oblivion here. But I don't know that I like this keep. Well, got a lot better with the Swizzle Spear here. Do they have the removal spell? They do not. They have the Consider into been a Spire Bluff Canal. Once again, opponent's kind of sputtering, doing nothing the first couple of turns. We attack. They reveal Hanukkah. Nope, Steam Vents. So once again, opponent's doing nothing. They're dying to our creatures. We literally have to do nothing. We attack. They finally have a bolt. And they still do nothing. They play an Abrade. We take this as an opportunity to potentially resolve some spells. Kind of dumb there, though. Did play around Spell Pierce, but I still could have got by like a bolt if they had one, but pretty safe assumption they didn't have a bolt at this point. Just shock in. Continue to pressure them down to 9. Opponent still does nothing. So we have no obligation to do anything. Opponent continues to pass. We continue to pass. Still taking no game actions, once again, because we literally have lethal in our hand. Opponent goes to 8. And rinse, repeat. We play a Goblin Guide. They finally have to react now as they're taking 3 a turn instead of 1. They play an Unholy Heat, even though they have a Fury on top. They have a Bolt. Opponent Flusterstorms our Bolt, which is fine. We're mainly doing this to get our whatchamacallit out of range. They have a Spell Snare. So our opponent has all the tools. The problem is the Swiss Spear is staying alive. So even though they dealt with our spells, they're still taking 3. Opponent plays their Murktide Regent. We know they have a Fury in hand, so we're not really playing around terribly much here. They could have like one spell, one counter spell. And Exquisite Firecraft once again does the job. So even if they had a counter spell in hand, but I was thinking more likely that they had Spell Pierce in hand because they really haven't had a chance to leverage it. Yeah, opponent had pretty good interactive hand, but still lost because they mulliganed a little bit, and we had some pretty fortunate draws. So can we make top 8 going into round number 7? Round number 7, we're on the draw, unfortunately, against the Bullwinkle 6705. Could see an argument for keeping this hand, especially on the draw with the 1-lander and the 2 1-drops. I mulligan. Similar hand, but we actually have mana to operate with. Obviously, we're putting back a land, probably Sunbaked Canyon, maybe Bloodstained Mire. Choose to put back Sacred Foundry. So, none of the above. Opponent leads on Misty Rainforest into Suspending Crashing Footballs. So, we're up against Cascading Rhinos. So, we need to get him dead. Opponent was nice enough to deal themselves 3. We hand them a land. They get Temur Rhinos. We play the Swizzle Spear. We play Lava Spike. So, the one thing with them, especially game number 1, is the only counter spell you're playing around is Force of Negation. They could have Subtlety, they could have Fury, but you're more concerned with just trying to get them dead, so because they put on a clock usually much faster than Murktide does, so they ice down our creature. We deal them 2. They have another Fire Ice on top. They have a Rhinos coming. They play Shardless Agent. So we can now put them to 6, but 6 is not dead. So we Searing Blaze, hold back our thing. They do the thing. We double block. Try to bolt. Sad part is we knew they had a Fire Ice in hand, so this didn't really get us very far, but they just had a Petty Theft, so it didn't matter. We draw a land, we crack, we play a Swizzle Spear, we try to attack them. Our opponent plays more Rhinos, so now we need to top deck next turn regardless and hope they don't have Force of Negation. They Rhino us. They ice our that source. We draw a Rift Bolt and we die. Disappointing we're down a game, especially playing for top 8, but we got some more chances, so let's go to sideboarding. Alright, going to sideboarding, taking a look. We bring in our copies of... Definitely bringing in Roiling Vortex. And then... Looks like we also brought in... What cards did we bring in? Oh, our copies of Exquisite Firecraft. Counterspell deck. Duh. Boarding out 4 copies of Searing Blaze, 2 copies of Riftbolt. Blaze doesn't really answer much of the relevant stuff. It can answer a Fury or a Shardless Agent, but you really want something that answers X4s, none of which this does. And Riftbolt gets a little bit awkward when you're playing with your own Roiling Vortexes, so... Alright, taking a look at our opening hand. Not the most impressive hand. 4 lands again. Does have a Vortex, so we could consider keeping that. So if I were to keep this hand, it deals 6 points of burn plus a Vortex. And it looks like I end up keeping the hand. Maybe feeling a little bit of pressure going for playing for top 8. This is probably a hand you should mulligan. Because the Vortex can get answered in a lot of ways. So, play the Vortex out. They Force of Negation it. And at this point, if they have any type of reasonable Rhino draw, sadly, unfortunately, this game is pretty much over at this point. So we attack. They get a Brazen Borrower and kill our Goblin Guide. So they do nothing. We draw a Boros Charm, which is nice. We skewer the critics. They can probably fetch Basic Forest here and Violent Outburst. Put 4 Rhinos into play, so we need to top deck very well from here. They post a 10. So we draw lands, so that basically means we're dead. Opponent fires us. And 2 more Trampling Rhinos and we're dead. So if you crack the fetch here, then you're dead to a lot of different things. Could have been worth the thinning, but kind of a disappointing end to this run. We'll talk about here in 1 second. So 5-2 run ended up being good for 15th. We were one of the bottom 5-2s because of the loss in round 1. We lost round 1, ran the table, and then lost in round 7. Unfortunately, not good enough to make top 8. As far as the list overall, I like the presence of Zurgo. You know, I've been preaching for a while that you really need more 1-drops. I know a lot of people are on the kick Eidolon out of the Burn fan club, but Eidolon's always been a high-risk, high-reward card, much like Searing Blaze. There's been times in the past where Eidolon's been in even worse position than it is now. You know, people talk about, you know, Fury and Leyline Binding and Solitude and all these things that don't answer it or don't take damage to answer it. The reality is it's still good against counterspell decks. You know, if you're putting pressure on them and Eidolon increases that pressure, and it forces, yes, you're taking damage from your spells, but it forces them to take 2 for their Flusterstorm, to take 2 for their Counterspell, to take 2 for their Spell Snare. And if you already want to increase the number of 1-drops in your deck, to increase the speed of the deck, or to increase its consistency of the speed of the deck, then playing a certain greater number of creatures is perfectly reasonable when you're already trying to spread your opponent's removal spells pretty thin. As far as Burn's place in the meta overall, I still am not the biggest fan of its positioning overall. I still think Murktide's a rough matchup. I still think Rhinos can be a tough matchup. Amulet Titan's a nightmare. Yawgmoth is close, probably slightly favors Vern, although a good Yawg pilot finds a way around that. Hammer Time's a rough matchup. So there's a lot of decks at the top of the meta that just are not fantastic matchups for Burn. That said, I'm really liking the sideboard configuration. The 2-pass, I've been perfectly happy with that. The only card a lot of people have been playing that isn't really in the list is Deflecting Palm, and honestly, I don't miss it. I have a love-hate relationship with Deflecting Palm. Sometimes it's an absolutely amazing card and blows people out, but the more people expect it, the worse it gets. Yes, they play around it, even if you don't have it, but you know, it's a reactive card. You can say the same thing a little bit about Path, but Path, you can play Path proactively to remove a Murktide, or remove a Leisure Shredder, or remove a Tarmogoyf, or remove a Construct token. Deflecting Palm, your opponent has to attack you. And generally when your opponent's attacking you against a burn player, they're generally winning. So, but it does free up slots for Exquisite Firecraft, which a lot of the decks that I've talked about, Murktide, Rhinos, Living In, are all counterspell decks. So, Creativity, generally speaking, is a 4 or 5 color variant with Spell Pierces and potentially counterspells like Flusterstorm post-board games. Counterspell deck. So, seems like a pretty good time to have Exquisite Firecraft, at least some number in your sideboard, whether you want 2, 3, whatever. But that's our run. We finished it up, did pretty well. Overall, pretty happy for not playing in a bigger tournament in quite some time. So, maybe we'll do more of these when I get off for good behavior. But don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you like red-based content, especially of the burn variety here in Modern. And I hope to see you for the next week's video.